Well, we've been, this is week 2 of our series going through the Gospel of Luke, which also is going along with our summer reading plan. If you haven't done that yet, you can get the sheet like this on the back table, and it gives you all the times we're reading, what we're reading each week. And then each week the message will go, a part of that reading will be part of the message that Sunday, and you can listen to it online if you missed it or if you want to hear it again. And so one of the things that's neat about this series is we're going through the Gospel of Luke, but it's also kind of helping us read the Bible in a helpful way. And there's helpful ways to read the Bible, and there's unhelpful ways. And I think Joe's given us some really helpful ways. And you can see some of those that are in there, different ways. But one, as Joe talked about last week, is just knowing who the author of whatever book of the Bible you're reading is can be helpful. And then who are they writing to originally? Yes, us, but originally they had an audience. And for Luke, it was not just the Jewish people, but it was everyone. It was the Jews and the non-Jews. And so he was reaching out. And the theme that comes from a saying that Jesus said, it's hard to read up there, but it says, "For the Son of God came to seek and save the lost." And you see that theme running all through the book of Luke. That Jesus, the stories, the events of Jesus' life are put together by Luke in a way to see that he was reaching everybody, the downtrodden, the people that were outcast. He wasn't writing to the super chickens. And if you don't know what that means, you got to go online and find out who the super chickens are. So another kind of tip when we think about reading the Bible is, what do we do with the begas? What do we do with the genealogies? Those, that are in the Bible periodically, and they got all the names. And in this week's reading, we see that in the book of Luke. It's kind of hard to read up there, but there's a whole list of names from Jesus' lineage, from Joseph, all the way to Adam. And, you think, people say, do I have to read, all those names? What if I can't pronounce them? Don't worry, I can't pronounce them either. If you can't pronounce them, there's one person that knows every name exactly, the Aramaic, the Greek, and the Hebrew, and that's Joe. So if you need to know, Joe, how do you say this? Just go right to the master.
That's not true.
I don't hear anything. So feel free if you're getting to those that, you just want to skip down. But they are actually there for a reason. And just to show you that, if the theme of Luke is to seek and to save, everybody is included. One scholar talking about this says this. He says, the overall intention of Luke's list is clear. He wants to show Jesus' connection to David, to Abraham, and to Adam. Each connection allows a point to be made about who Jesus is and who is he is qualified to serve. So just in his genealogies, because Matthew's genealogy starts at Abraham, and he was the first one of the Jewish nation. But Luke goes all the way back to Adam to show that Jesus is qualified to serve everybody, not just the Jewish nation. So, Father's Day. We think about Father's Day. A lot probably goes on in your minds. And you think about what fathers say to kids. So what words, what messages did you hear or not hear from your father? Were they positive? Did you hear positive things like, I'm so proud of you, I love you, I'm so glad you're in our family? Did you hear no words because maybe your father wasn't there for you? Or did you hear negative words? Did you hear things that weren't real positive? There's a movie out recently about the singer-songwriter Bart Miller, who wrote the song I Can Only Imagine, which turned out to be this huge success just beyond Christian music. And really, the movie is about a father and son, his relationship with his dad. And he didn't necessarily hear positive things from his dad. Let's take a look.
When I was 11 years old, life was tough.
Hey, hon. What you got there?
It's a fighter helmet that I made during a big battle in space.
You sure worked hard on that, didn't you?
What's that?
It's just junk.
You dream apart, that's good. Hey, you're imagining things.
I'm gonna teach you something, Bart. Dreams don't pay the bills. Nothing good comes from it. All it does is keep you from all this. From knowing what's real. You understand that? Huh?
Yes, Daddy.
Well, since that's a piece of junk, why don't you just go throw it away?
Where's Mama?
She's gone. She don't want me no more. And she don't want you neither.
Dad, I can do this.
No, you can't. And you're gonna blink your eyes and you're gonna realize that life has gotten you nowhere because you chased some stupid dream.
I can
Not real positive words at all. And sometimes when we think about, hearing words from our dad, we ended up feeling disappointed. I thought about my dad. That's a picture of him. If you don't know, my dad died when I was 10 in 1967. And that's probably a picture of him, I don't know, it was out in front of our bar, probably a year or so before he died. And, I was thinking last year, it was 2017, I was like, it's been 50 years since my dad died. That was so wild. And I thought, I haven't heard his voice in 50 years because we didn't have, back in 67, we didn't have the VCRs and the audio. All I have is 8mm movies and they're silent. And I was going through the box of 8mm movies a while back, so I wanted to get some of them digitized. And I found these audio tapes in there, reel to reel. And I was like, my dad used to have a portable reel to reel, I remember at one time. And I wonder if his voice is on here. Or are they blank? I don't know. I didn't have a reel to reel. So I looked on eBay, and the ones they wanted that they said worked, cost too much, and the ones that were cheap, they're like, yeah, we don't know if it'll work. So I wasn't going to take a chance. And I thought, oh, well. And then one day I'm talking to Roger. And Roger, is a man after my own heart because he realizes the beauty of not throwing things out. Because you never know. Right, Roger? You never know. Linda doesn't always share my thought of that. I don't know if Candy always shares that idea. So anyway, Roger has a reel-to-reel that he's kept for a lot of years. And so I brought my tapes over and we were out in his garage and we were, and I didn't know what was on them, but we heard some kind of voices. You couldn't make out what they were. And so I brought the reel-to-reel home and I plugged it into my computer and I got the audio in so I could digitize it and use some software. And as I was trying to, because some of it was like real fast, like chipmunks, and I'm slowing it down, and then I heard my dad's voice. And, and I was like, and I knew it was his voice because he identified himself. And, sometimes we think, oftentimes when you want to hear something from your dad, you're disappointed. And I was thinking like, oh, what is he saying? What is on here? What was the profound message I got from my dad? Now, this is hard to hear still, this audio, so I'll translate afterwards if you don't hear it. Because Kevin heard it this morning. He's like, is that even English? So all right, here's what I heard.
Testing, listening to Del Talking. Thanks to Del Talking. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks to Del Talking. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks to Del Talking. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Jack Chutel talking, testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was the profound words I got to hear. A little disappointing. It's good to hear his voice again, but a little disappointing. And so we're gonna hear the words of a father today that is not disappointing, but is life-giving. And we find those words in the Gospel of Luke, and they go like this. Now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized and was praying, the heavens were opened, and the Holy Spirit descended on him in bodily form, like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased." Wow. Wouldn't you love to hear that from your earthly dad? I'm well pleased. Well, if you were in that water, what would he say to you? If you were in the water and the heavens opened, what would God the Father say to you? What would he say to me? You know, if I'm in that water and he opened up heaven, would he go, close it back up? Not that guy. Would he open it up and go, oh, yeah, he's my son, but I'm a little embarrassed. And he screws up a lot. What would he say? Well, the good news is we can know exactly what he'd say. He would say the exact same thing to us that he said to Jesus. The exact same thing. And you might say, yeah, but Jesus was perfect, and he was righteous, and I'm not, and I do blow it. So he couldn't say that to me, but he does. Paul the Apostle in the book of Galatians says, "But now that faith has come, we're no longer under a guardian," or talking about the Old Testament law, "for in Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, neither is there male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." So that means when he says, when we come by faith and accept God's salvation, we are clothed with his righteousness. When he looks at us there in the water, he doesn't say, "I'm so disappointed." He said, "That's my child, because I see my son clothing you, because he came and he died on the cross and he resurrected so that we could have the righteousness of Christ. And we're in his family and we're his beloved children." And he looks at us and says, "I'm well pleased." And if you think about that, what would it mean to embrace the fact, the truth of our belovedness? And sometimes it's not always easy to do that, at least not for me. So I want to look at a couple of actions we can take to help us embrace our belovedness. And the first one is to hear God the Father's voice. Like, we hear a lot of voices, don't we? People say, I don't want to say that to a psychologist, but I hear voices, right? Sometimes we hear things that, that come into our mind that talk the opposite about our belovedness. Or we have twisted and distorted who God the Father is from our own fathers, from our own caregivers growing up. And so what we want to do is to be able to say, who is the real God? What is he really saying to me? And I want to be able to hear that voice. Well, since it is Father's Day, we want to hear from a father, Father Henry Nouwen. And Father Henry Nouwen wrote a lot of books about the spiritual life. And he wrote one connected to our passage today. And it's called The Life of the Beloved. And in that, he talks about this idea in these voices. And he says this: "Yes, there is that voice, the voice that speaks from above and from within, and that whispers softly or declares loudly, 'You are my beloved, on you my favor rests.' It certainly is not easy to hear that voice in a world filled with voices that shout, 'You're no good, you're ugly, you're worthless, you're despicable, you're nobody.' Unless you can demonstrate the opposite, you can work hard enough and get on the gerbil wheel and prove that you're good or prove that you're not despicable. Maybe then, and many of us do that, and when we fail at that, we just sink down into this feeling of worthlessness. But that's not hearing the voice of the beloved. That's not what God the Father is saying to us. And actually being able to hear God the Father's voice and identifying with that is the easiest of the two actions. because, we can read the Bible, we can know that. And I've had lots of people tell me, yeah, Dave, I know that. I know I'm God's beloved. I know He loves me, but I can't receive it. I can't receive it. And so that's going to be our next action, is to be able to receive the message. Henry Nouwen says, self-rejection is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life because it contradicts the sacred voice that calls us the beloved. Being the beloved expresses the core truth of our existence. And that is so true. The core truth of our existence. So if that's the core truth of my existence, and I'm only hearing and listening to and buying into the other voices that tell me I'm worthless and I'm no good, then what's that going to do to my identity? What's that going to do to my emotional and spiritual state? It's not going to a good place. So we want to learn how to receive the message. And so we want to look at a couple of ways to do that. And the first way we're going to look at is doing the real work of prayer. And oftentimes we think that prayer is about talking to God, and it is. But, Henry Nouwen talks about this idea of listening to prayer. And he says this, when I go to a quiet place to pray, I realize that, although I have a tendency to say many things to God, the real work of prayer is to become silent and listen to the voice that says good things about me. He goes on after this and says, that might sound like self-indulgent. I just want to sit and listen to good things about me. But it really isn't. Because if you think about it, doesn't God want to send us the message that we're His beloved? He sent it to Jesus. He sends it to us. So He wants us to sit and listen and hear it. And that's one way we can do that in prayer, is just spend a little time doing that. And another type of listening prayer that connects with reading the Bible is this idea of putting yourself in the story. So you look at the different stories in the scriptures. There's the woman caught in adultery. There's the blind man that's begging. There's the prodigal son. There's all these stories where Jesus touches people's lives that we can put ourselves into and experience that. And if you just think about this one, the baptism one. If you were reading and get to a quiet place and you're praying and you read that story just of Jesus being baptized over and over, and then just close your eyes and imagine you're there. You're in the water, and the heavens open, and the Father is saying to you, you're my child, my beloved child. And to just sit with that. Now for some of you, you could just bask in that for a long time with no problem. But others of you would really struggle and say, I can't do that. I've had people say things to me like, Dave, I just hate myself. I hate everything about me. And anytime anyone tries to love them, they just push it away. And so if you're struggling in any way when you do this, it's so uncomfortable, you might want to just run away. Don't. My encouragement is don't. Stay in it, even though it's uncomfortable. Because uncomfortable is not always bad. It's often really good. So just sit in that, even though it's uncomfortable, and just take time. And not once, not twice, but a lot of times. Do that over and over. To just let that message be for a little while. And the second way we're going to look at is to speak 2 important words every day. Henry Nouwen says, at every point of the journey, our journey of faith, there is the choice to say yes and the choice to say no. So basically, the 2 things we want to say every day is yes and no. So what do we want to say no to? Well, we want to say no to those voices that are the opposite that call us the beloved. Those negative voices that come in that say you're no good, you're a loser, you're stupid. All those voices that come are in our heads. They come from people around us, maybe people at work, spouses, family, you name it. Right? These voices come, and we want to start saying no to those. No, I'm not going to listen to those. No, I'm not going to buy into that. And I've had people say, Dave, I do that, but you know what? The voices don't listen to me. They don't take no for an answer. And when that happens, you got to learn ways to be more emphatic with your no. A few years ago, actually many years ago now, I was working a lot of part-time jobs, and one of them was I was working with some videographers that they went around videotaping weddings, and they had like multi-camera, and they did all this live editing, and I would either do camera work, or I was a roadie, do whatever. And they said, we get a lot of calls for single camera weddings. Why don't you do that? It's good money. And so they give me this camera, and I did a couple, and then I told them, I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's like incredible pressure, because if one thing goes wrong with one camera, right, you can't go, oh yeah, can we stop this wedding and rewind? My camera went out like at the start of the vows. You can't do a do-over, right? So it was just so much pressure. I said, I don't want to do this. And, so the guy, his name was Rich, and he just kept, talking to me about it every week, and he just wasn't getting my no. So finally, I said, look, Rich, I'd rather go to the dentist and have all my teeth pulled out without anesthesia than do a single camera wedding. And in all seriousness, he looks at me, he looks at his wife, and he goes, I really think Dave doesn't want to do that. Just had to be a little more emphatic with my no, evidently. Well, then we also want to be saying yes every day. Instead of going to Henry Nouwen as our spiritual director, we want to go to there's only one other spiritual director, which of course would be Jim Carrey. And Jim Carrey a few years ago did a movie called Yes Man. And it was goofy comedy, but basically he played this character called Carl Allen, and Carl always said no to everything and lived this dull life. So he goes to this self-help seminar where they tell you the power of yes. And you say yes to everything in your life. So he started doing that. Of course, it's crazy and goofy movie. But at the end, he realizes that when he changed his whole life around and said yes instead of no, that he started to enjoy life a lot more. And, Henry Nouwen talks about this change we have to make in order to really connect to our belovedness. That we're swapping, we're flipping everything over. Instead of saying no to the negative, we're saying no to the positive, we're saying no to the negative, and yes to the positive, and flipping over. It takes quite a change. And he says this, and I don't want to read this too fast because there's some really good stuff in this. He says, the change of which I speak is the change from living life as a painful test to prove that you deserve to be loved, to living it as an unceasing yes to the truth of that belovedness. Just let that sentence sink in for a second. Put simply, life is a God-given opportunity to become who we are. Who are we? We're already clothed in His righteousness. We're already His beloved. To affirm our own true spiritual nature, claim our truth, appropriate and integrate the reality of our being, but most of all, to say yes to the one who calls us the beloved. There's a lot of good stuff in that. Wow, but to say yes on a daily basis. And another way to maybe look at this, as we think about flipping our life around and focus, is to sort of go on an adventure. And to start looking in life, to look for the presence of God's love instead of the absence. Often, we get caught up in these negative loops, and it's easy to just see where God seems to not be. Well, look at that, you let that, how can you be loving God? Look what's going on in my own life. How can God do this to me? Where is His love? And I get that, but I also get that when we do that, we miss so much. Because there's so many places to find God's love in this world. Not just in His Word, but all over and all around us in so many ways. Paul the Apostle prays this awesome prayer. It's for us too. It was for the Ephesians originally. It says, and I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the saints, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you might be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. He's saying we need help and power, but to do that is to be able to grasp all the dimensions of God's love. It's so big And it's so easy to miss when we get caught in a negative cycle or negative loop. You know, beginning of this year, they discovered this huge underwater cave. It's so long, it's about the distance from Detroit all the way north of Muskegon, 215 miles. And it's deeper in some places than the Big Ben clock tower. And it's wide at some places that you could fit a 747. Other places are narrow. And it's called the Sac-Actum. And it's in the Yucatan Peninsula. And, you know, at one time they knew about the Sac-Actum, but then there was this shorter one, but they found out recently they're connected. So it made the longer one even longer. And the divers, you know, when you look on YouTube, they just are talking about, you just go into these little passages, and then this whole cavern comes out, and it just keeps going and going, and there's all these places to explore. When we think about God's love, I mean, that's what it's like. If we go on that adventure, and I want to change my mindset to start really looking and finding where God is and not where I think He's not, that can really transform us and get us more connected to His belovedness. Well, we come to the call to faith. A couple of questions. Will you commit to hearing the voice of God, the Father? Will you receive His words of truth and embrace your belovedness?